Hey guys, it's Layla Shaver, your favorite compliance nerd, and today we're talking about updates to Regulation SP. Let's jump right in. So remember, this presentation is really about what firms actually need to do and not necessarily what the rule just says in isolation. So by the end of this presentation, I want to make sure that you understand both the requirements and the actual implementation gaps that may exist in your business today. So let's jump in. So why does this matter? Regulation SP has existed for years, but firms have treated it like a privacy notice rule. That's no longer accurate. The SEC updated this rule because data is everywhere now. There's data companies, there's analysis of data. I mean, how often are you online clicking on stuff and then all of a sudden ads are popping up for things you've looked at, right? Data is everywhere. But so are breaches. They become so far more common, and the number of breaches has increased over the last 5 years, 4, 5, 6x plus. So it's a big deal. And firms are outsourcing more. They're looking to outside vendors more and more to kind of fill in those operational gaps within their businesses. So the key message the SEC is making here is that there are real world failures in cybersecurity and vendor oversight, and we have to do something about it. So who's covered? We're going to keep it simple. If you're an RIA, you're covered. Additionally, broker-dealers, investment companies, transfer agents, right? So we're not going to overcomplicate the definitions. The regulation does apply to your firm and how you handle data from others. So for fund managers, investor data is also included. Just an FYI there. So what actually changed? These are not incremental tweaks. The rule requires a formal incident response plan, mandatory client notification, and a broader definition of protected data. So if you're thinking this is just updating your privacy policy, it is far more involved than that. So the big shift is that before it was we have a policy in our compliance manual. With these updates to Regulation SP, now firms have to show how their programs actually work. This is also consistent with the direction in which the SEC is going towards, where it's not enough to just check the box anymore. They really want to see that you can demonstrate that your program is working, it's catching issues, and it's being reviewed and updated on an ongoing basis. The SEC is moving towards operational compliance, demonstrable controls, and they're no longer asking you what you do. They're asking you to prove what you actually do. So when it comes to these incidents or breaches that happen, they want you to follow these steps, right? Detect the incidents. That's coming from your compliance program. Is it able to detect those incidents? Responding to those incidents, do you have that incident response plan? Who's responsible? What's being done? And then ultimately, how do you recover from those incidents? And that includes whether there's any client notification that is required. So we're going to talk about what the SEC expects, right? So if you were going to walk through an exam now, they would start with a risk assessment, they would request the documents, then test your answers. But this isn't a document review, it's a program validation exercise. So they're going to want to see in their process that you've performed a risk assessment of your cybersecurity. You understand, who your vendors are, what they're doing. You have the ability to verify and test that they're complying with the contract and performing what they promised to do. Of course, all of this needs to be documented because the SEC is going to have you provide documentation to support that you're doing this testing. The SEC also conducts interviews so that it's not just here's what our documents say, but that you as the CCO as the owner can articulate what the cybersecurity policy is, what your incident response plan is, and you understand the regulation and how your processes work. They want to see that testing, and finally your findings. And if there needs to be an update, a change, some sort of remediation as a result of those findings, the SEC wants to see that you've done that. So your requests from the SEC may include policies, vendor contracts, your risk assessment. And if you've never created a cybersecurity risk assessment, then that's a gap. Make a note of it. Most firms would not be able to produce that today. So again, what are they going to ask for? Your compliance manual, your safeguards policies, your vendor contracts, and your risk assessment. So your core requirement with the Regulation SP updates is the incident response plan. This is the centerpiece of the rule. Now, most firms either have nothing or they've been provided some sort of generic template by their provider. That is not going to be enough anymore. The real question you have to answer is, if you have an incident tomorrow, could your team actually execute, right? Are you able to detect? Are you able to respond? Are you able to recover? This is mandatory now. It is not optional. So what does the incident response plan need to include? So there needs to be an investigation. This is what data was accessed. This is where it's really important to have some sort of IT vendor, or if you're a large enough firm, you're going to want your chief technology officer or whoever is responsible for IT within your business to be able to investigate. If you're a smaller firm and you don't have that position in-house, you need to have an IT provider who can really go in and conduct an audit and understand what data was accessed. Next, you want to have containment. You want to stop the breach, right? Once you understand how the breach occurred and what was accessed, whether that means a wipe, password updates, updating, making sure you've had recent updates from Microsoft, you're getting routine patches on your technology. That's really important. You want to stop the breach. And then remediation. You want to fix your systems, right? So this has to be tailored to your firm and not copied from a template. So this is where working with an IT vendor is very helpful, because they can help you actually map out what those specific processes are that they follow in order to investigate, contain, and then remediate. So a new part of Regulation SP, one of the updates, is this client identification rule. So this is one of the biggest risks for enforcement. The 30-day timeline is strict. So you've got to tell clients if sensitive customer information was accessed or was reasonably likely to be accessed. So if you're not absolutely sure, but you think there's a possibility, then you still have to notify your clients. If you don't have a process in place before an incident, you will miss this deadline. So again, this is a great opportunity to talk with your IT vendors, or if you don't have one and you need to get one, making sure that they would be able to conduct the investigation, stop the breach, and remediate all within that 30-day period. And that includes notifying clients. So what counts as sensitive, right? What is the sensitive information? What are these things that we're talking about would be potential breaches? So most firms underestimate this definition. It's not just social security numbers, it's login credentials, account access information. It's also the ways to get that sensitive data, that personally identifiable information, that non-public material information. So assume most client data would trigger notification if you're unsure whether something would trigger or be defined as sensitive. When do not have to notify, right? So this is where firms get it wrong. You can't just decide, oh, it's fine, it's okay, everything's all right. You have to follow those steps of investigate, document, remediate, right? And if there's nothing to remediate, right, there was nothing access, then you have to be able to justify your position that you don't need to notify the client. And that's really where you need to have your documentation and keep that documentation, right? The documentation is what protects you, not you just coming to a conclusion that you aren't required to notify the client. Vendor due diligence and oversight. This is a huge shift, right? A lot of RIAs rely heavily on vendors, IT providers, CRM systems, cloud storage. You've really got to understand your vendors. You have to understand, first of all, who they are. You know, the longer you're in business, the bigger you get, you tend to rack up vendors, right? It's not just who's your IT provider, but it's also your vendors from a software perspective. What is all the different technology you're using? Where is data kept? It's kept in so many places. So making sure that you are able to accurately identify the full scope of all your vendors. You want to be able to understand how they work, what their cybersecurity is like, if they've had any breaches. If so, what was the outcome of those breaches? What did they do, if anything, to remediate? And you also want to make sure you're monitoring them on an ongoing basis. This is not a one and done. There's your initial vendor due diligence, and then there's ongoing vendor due diligence where you need to continue to follow up with these vendors so you can keep up with any new issues that may arise, right? And this is where keeping a vendor list is super important, reviewing it on a periodic basis to make sure it stays accurate. And this is also where you'll be wanting to understand how they are complying with Reg SP as well, and whether they're able to meet the requirements of the updates to Regulation SP. All right, so let's talk about data mapping. All right, this is where everything starts. If you don't know what data you have and where it lives, then you cannot protect it. You cannot respond to incidents. And this is one of the biggest gaps we see in practice. So you really want to understand the data, where it is, who has access, and where it flows. Again, for bigger firms, firms that have been around for a while, you've migrated your data through different systems as you've changed technology providers, application providers. You know, you may have different drives or folders that include different information. As your leadership has changed, as employees have come and gone, where data is stored and who has access can evolve and change. And if you haven't kept up with that information and you aren't regularly reviewing and cleaning up your data and access, then this can become a huge undertaking to figure out where your data is. So it's super important. This is a foundational concept of really understanding where your data is, who has access to it, and where does it go. So again, as I mentioned, the SEC is shifting to show me the evidence, right? So you need to document every incident, every decision, every process, right? It's something I say often. If it's not written, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So this is where, for record keeping, you want to have your policies and procedures. You want to have your incident response plan, your incident logs, your notification decisions, and your vendor oversight. Super, super important. So all of that vendor due diligence, your initial and ongoing, all of that is documentation you should be maintaining. So let's talk about disposal requirements. So this is often overlooked. You must securely dispose of data, and you have to ensure vendors do the same, which can be difficult because for a lot of vendors, I mean, are they really disposing of your data? Are they really deleting it permanently, right? And frankly, the answer is probably no, for a lot of places like Facebook, right? Facebook is not actually deleting your stuff, let's be real. But that's where you want to, again, during your initial vendor due diligence, when you're engaging with these vendors, you're signing these contracts, you want to understand how they use your data. When you ask them to delete because you're moving, are they actually deleting it? So you want to understand how old client files are being disposed of. You want to look at decommissioned systems, what happens to that. This has even come up in cases where a vendor has gone out of business. There are a lot of new companies that get started that are trying to create a technological solution, and they just never quite get off the ground, right? And some of you are early adopters of certain applications and tools. And it's really important to understand if that business no longer exists or gets shut down, what is happening to that data? Who's getting rid of it? Who's wiping it? So again, understanding how your vendors dispose of data, and frankly, how you guys dispose of data, right? You have books and records retention, right? Are you keeping data information beyond your books and records requirement, right? Which is generally 6 years from the date of last use, right? Or the last time that version of a document was used. So are you keeping it beyond that, or are you disposing of that data? What's your process? So you want to make sure, again, this is documented, there's someone responsible, there's a process, and there's verification. I'm a big proponent of trust, but verify. And this is very much what these rule updates are about. So let's talk about some common deficiencies and then really what you guys need to do. So the SEC is telling us that policies are weak, policies are not followed, or policies don't exist, right? So policies are weak because you're using a template. They're not robust. It's heavy on policy, not a lot of procedure. Because it's a template, it doesn't reflect what's practically happening in your business. So you're not actually doing what the policies are saying, because the policy is a template and you're actually doing something different, or you just don't have policies on it at all. So a lot of firms today are not compliant with the Reg SP updates. So what RAs actually need to do is kind of bring it all together. This is not one task. This is a system. You are building a cybersecurity program. You are building an incident response program. You're building a vendor oversight program. So you need to follow some practical implementation steps, right? So we talked about doing your data mapping, creating policies and updating that, building your incident response plan, conducting your vendor review, train your staff, train, and then test, and then train, right? This is a multi-month project. It is not a checklist. It is not something that can be done in an afternoon. Like, this is going to take time. It has to be implemented. You have to train your staff. And with anything new that you do with staff, you have to follow up. You have to kind of really follow up, make sure they understand all the changes that are occurring. So, bottom line here, right? Large firms had a compliance date of December 3rd, 2025, and smaller firms have a compliance date of June 3rd, 2026, which means you need to be in compliance with the rule updates as of those dates. So again, you've got to make sure that, you know, these deadlines, especially for smaller firms, which is the vast majority of you, They may seem far away, but they're coming up fast, and implementation takes time. So you want to make sure you're following up on your vendor contracts. You want to review your policies, make sure you're redesigning them, and you've got to create training programs so you can train your staff and continue to train them throughout the year and beyond. Keep reminding them, keep reinforcing these changes and how they have to update it. And that's frankly where testing is super important, so that you actually stress test your team, right? Reg SP is no longer about privacy notices. It's really about whether your firm can actually protect client data and respond when something goes wrong. So this is operational compliance. This is not theoretical compliance. This is something that you have to put in place, a program you have to put in place and implement. So what you should be asking yourself today. You really should be asking yourself, where are you today? Do you have an incident response plan? Have you mapped your data? Have you identified where your gaps are and get a team engaged to implement these solutions to fill those gaps, right? Reg SP deadline is coming very soon for small firms, so you've got to get started today. Yesterday would have been better, but today works just as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Otherwise, I hope you found this helpful. Check out the resources in the resource section. We have an incident response template for you to customize and fit to your business. We also have a letter we've put together to send to your vendors so that you can confirm with them in writing that they will be able to comply with the Reg SP updates, namely that they respond to you within 72 hours of a breach and let you know. So those are 2 pieces of homework for you to look at, review, and utilize as you're implementing updates to your policies to comply with these Regulation SP updates. Additionally, for resources, you'll find some webinars the SEC conducted. So there's a couple links for those. One is for large firms, one is for small firms. There's an SEC fact sheet and just some other regulatory information directly from the SEC about the rule and what the expectations are. So again, hope you found this helpful. Best wishes on getting your updates completed. And again, if you need help, just reach out to us. Thanks so much.